Hello, and welcome to the Look Forward podcast from S&P Global. I'm Naki Mendoza with S&P Global Energy. I'm Executive Conference Director for CERAWeek, and I'll be your host today. In today's rapidly shifting markets, success depends on anticipating what's next. The professionals who excel are those who can spot emerging trends before they fully materialize. The Look Forward podcast delivers exactly that. Insights to help you prepare for tomorrow's challenges and opportunities. We bring you expert perspectives on macroeconomic trends, capital markets, energy transition, and global trade, with a sharp focus on what these developments mean for the decisions that will shape your tomorrow. Together, we are committed to providing you the forward-looking intelligence you need to navigate uncertainty with confidence. We're zooming out and taking a look at the big picture of energy in today's episode. 6 months in, 2026 has already been one of the most volatile years ever for energy, marked, of course, by conflict in the Middle East and ensuing shocks to the global economy. But there are other broad and deep trends at play across the industry, from surging AI demand to the diversity of supplies, deployment of capital, convergence of business models, and the resilience of supply chains to meet that growth. So, what are the various pathways that operators and investors are having to navigate? And if the geopolitics of energy are placing markets and industry at an inflection point, well, then what's next? To explore these themes, we're joined today by Daniel Yergin, Vice Chair of S&P Global and the founder and chair of CERAWeek, and resoundingly one of the world's leading analysts and authorities on the global energy industry. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Prize, The Quest, and most recently, The New Map. For decades, Dan has chronicled the evolution of the world's energy systems and the forces that transform it, from markets to technology to politics. In short, he is precisely the person to help us unpack these topics. Dan, welcome to the Look Forward podcast.
Well, thank you, Naki, and very glad to be with you.
Thank you, Dan. It's our pleasure to have you. So we're speaking today in late June, roughly the midway point of the year. So it's a fitting time to take stock of the state of energy, if you will. You and I were both here in Washington, where down the street, presidents annually give a State of the Union and often emphatically characterize it in one or two words. So, in a similar exercise, I'm curious on your take. The state of world energy is?
That's a big question, but I guess we would say is world energy is in flux. At the beginning of the year of 2026, there was much hand-wringing and concern about oversupply and too much energy and what was going to happen to prices. And then, of course, you had first Venezuela, and then you had the biggest disruption in history, which was the Persian Gulf disruption, closing of the Strait of Hormuz. So I would say today on the agenda is sorting out as perhaps as a conclusion or some temporary conclusion to the crisis comes, what that means for global markets, what it means for players, what it means for where investment goes. At the same time, I think there's going to be a greater emphasis on energy security, on resilience, and of course, we'll be still focusing on that very big question about finding the electricity that's required for AI and data centers, which is certainly, maybe not as quite as visible as it was a few months ago, but very much out there.
Thank you, Dan. That's a lot to unpack. So let's get into some of that, starting, of course, with the lessons and the experience from the Strait of Hormuz. It is, of course, the defining issue that is shaping new trend lines across the world and the state of energy. Since February, you've described the events that have taken place as the biggest energy crisis that we've seen. And to be sure, it's caused pain disproportionately around the world, yet by and large, the long envisaged catastrophic scenarios have relatively been contained. Why is that?
I wrote an article, Naki, at the beginning of the crisis saying, is this the nightmare scenario? Because, of course, for decades, when people had done scenario work, it was a nightmare, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. It's certainly been a very big impact, particularly in Asia, but it hasn't been the catastrophe, as you say, that might have been expected. And I think it's because while the Strait, 20% of world oil, 20% of world LNG passed through it, there were alternatives. The Saudis had built a pipeline system as a result of the energy tanker wars of the 1980s, which was able to move substantial oil. Uh, the UAE, Abu Dhabi, had also built a pipeline that moved supplies out. It turned out that the growth of the U.S. was such a big difference from previous crises, and the U.S. became an exporter of both crude and product. And then another big factor, which wasn't appreciated in the first couple of weeks, is what was happening to China's demand for imports, which went down, and a question how much of that was coming from commercial inventory draw, how much was coming from their huge strategic stocks they built up, and how much was come from repressing demand. So all of those factors were there, and then on top of that, the International Energy Agency arranged a kind of coordinated release among its members of oil that also took some of the pressure off. So the world was basically missing like 1.2 billion barrels, but there was alternatives, and so I think that kind of resilience, as well as some demand destruction and demand repression, is what kept this from shooting up into those higher numbers that people had very much feared.
There's buffers in the system. It's a very resilient system, as you're saying. But still, major shocks like these can tend to have long tails. So even with the Strait so-called reopened and a ceasefire currently in place, again, we're recording this on June 23rd, what disruptions can still manifest?
Well, first of all, if the ceasefire, if it falls apart, if conflict renews, if Iran once again closes the strait, that's out there. And then if you talk about long tails, there's certainly an undercurrent of concern about if Iran turns what was a open navigation, uh, freedom of seas into an Iranian canal. What will that do for other choke points around the world and what other countries do? So that could certainly be one of the implications. I think another one that's important, well, this was a Persian Gulf, Iran war crisis. It also amplified the crisis and tensions within NATO between Europe and the United States.
Pain points have certainly manifested to date, and you wrote a piece in Time magazine recently about one of the pain points about gas prices, not oil prices, but the price at the pump and how it reflects a global market despite whatever volumes are produced at home. You wrote, quote, when Americans fill up their cars, they are not just looking at the price as it ticks up on the pump. They are looking at a reflection of America's role in the world and the changes in global politics. So speak to us about that, Dan. Talk about the psyche of gas prices, price at the pump, and their historic politicization in the American economy.
Well, there's no price in America, I think, that's more political than the price of gasoline, because people see it every day when they drive to work or get out on the highway. The numbers are posted, and what happened this time is that gasoline prices went up about 50%, and it was for several days or weeks there. That was led the news on television, prices at the pump, and it is the most sensitive price that is so visible. The politics converge on it. What was interesting to me is when I was writing the prize, the earliest congressional hearing I could find on gasoline prices was actually 1923, and very similar to the ones that happened all since then. Predictions that the price would go up to a huge amount, and fury and rage. And then new discoveries came along, new technologies came along, and the price of gasoline ended up about one-tenth of what had been predicted. And similarly, I mentioned in the article participating in a big congressional hearing in 2008 when gasoline reached $4.10 in the dollars of those days. And again, outrage and calls for action and people not wanting to pay much attention to supply and demand. And then what happened? Within 4 months, the price had fallen in half. So, there's sort of the economic cycles around gasoline prices, and obviously politics have a big impact on them, and then the political cycles as well. And I think, if gasoline prices had reached $5 instead of 4.50 as an average around the country, we would have heard a lot more political rancor about it.
You've written a lot throughout your career about the concept of energy security, both pre-shale revolution in the US and now energy security that is, as you've described, is coming back in vogue in a world in conflict. How should we see the concept of energy security through the lens of gasoline prices? Is it true energy security if our economic security from energy prices is determined by global politics?
Well, I think it is. Obviously, these prices uh, and the price of energy flows through so many other things. At one point, our agricultural economist said 70% of the cost of food in the United States, for instance, is energy, everything from fertilizer and diesel fuel for the tractors to processing and moving the food to the market and so forth. So energy prices permeate the economy in ways that people don't see. That's quite different from the signs you see hoisted above gasoline stations, and that does obviously get into economic security and it gets into inflation. And I think one of the key things that we're going to see probably over the next couple of months is to what degree these heightened prices, which have come down now, but flow into the kind of general inflation in the economy.
So there are tails to crises, and then there's also another ramification are there are resets and transformations. And you've spoken on various interviews and since February about a different world emerging from the Hormuz crisis. Add on to that your thesis of the new map of energy, your latest book. So what changes from here? What strategic rethinks has the Strait of Hormuz crisis
Well,
forced?
I think a lot is going to depend upon what is the position of Iran and what are its relations with its neighbors. I mean, almost Iran sent what almost 3,000 projectiles, give or take, just to the UAE. The damage, but on the other hand, these countries share a body of water and have to live together in some way. So, just how that's going to work out is going to be critical. And I think I don't think the country's really that it's clear yet how what the arrangements will be. So that's one big change. I think, secondly, this is a big impetus to two other things. One, to build more resilience, and for countries, I think that means storage outside the Gulf. I think we're going to see more of that. We're seeing countries in Southeast Asia now talk about strategic petroleum reserves. And I think this gives a new impetus to investment, exploration in other parts of the world. Uh, what one hears from the industry is looking much more intensively at Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean. I think gets more focus, and Latin America, and the sense of the U.S. Being part of this Western Hemisphere energy picture, which been talked about in the past, but people hadn't really seen. I mean, people would be surprised to know right now Brazil probably produces 4 times as much oil as Venezuela. I think one of the best kept secrets in the entire energy world is that Canada is the fourth largest producer of oil in the world. What's happening now in Argentina, the growth of the shale development in a region called the Vaca Muerta. So I think there's going to be more reorientation to capital to the Western Hemisphere, and we certainly see what a change in Canada from the previous government to the current government in terms of seeking to solidify Canada's position as an exporter, and particularly well positioned to be an exporter to East Asia through waters that take about 8 days to get there and don't go through any choke points. So those are some of the changes that I think. Uh, I was just yesterday talking to kind of a major international company that was more of a trading company, and it's just striking the amount of investment that they're putting in now into production, into new resources in the United States. That wasn't part of their playbook a couple of years ago.
And what does it mean for the future of non-hydrocarbon sources, i.e., renewables? Should we expect more of a doubling down on diversity of hydrocarbon sources, or is this a watershed moment away from a hydrocarbon-based system?
Well, I'm not sure watershed because there was, in a sense, a backing away. Europe, for instance, having to come to terms with its loss of economic competitiveness because of the energy policies it was promoting. I do think there's kind of a rebranding or repositioning of renewables as in terms of energy security rather than climate, and I certainly see that happening. Um, uh, Obviously, unless you have lots of electric cars, and we can talk about electric cars in a minute, uh, you don't. Wind and solar don't really address oil, uh, or they compete with natural gas, of course. Uh, but I think that this is a for renewables. Their role in energy security diversification is very important. And if we look around the world, about something like 90% of the new electric generating capacity that was added last year was renewables.
I want to move to a separate but related theme to the last points that you've been making, the theme of power, power in the electron sense, and the massive mobilization of industries, policies, and capital that is giving rise to not just AI, but a broader system of electrification. The theme of CERAWeek 2026, which you chair, of course, was largely built around AI and power, and the idea that traditional energy is fusing with the power industry and the tech industry to drive M&A, capital spend, vertical integration. You've studied major structural shifts in global energy. How does this convergence between power and AI compare to other historical energy shifts that you've
Well,
chronicled?
well, I think we can even go farther than that. I mean, that convergence. I mean, CERAWeek really was like big tech, hyperscalers, AI meets the energy industry. That was the really the. I mean, obviously there were many other themes there, but that was a dominant theme. And when you had, a delegation from NVIDIA there, we wouldn't have seen a delegation from NVIDIA at CERAWeek a couple of years ago. That tells you the change that's happening and these different sectors learning to talk to each other and how to work together. And one of the big projects that I'm helping to lead is specifically on, the supply chains for the data centers, because you're talking about what is the biggest, in inflation adjusted terms, the biggest infrastructure investment in American history. This is, some say this is the seventh of such of those, going back to canals and highways and et cetera, et cetera. But it's very big, and I think it's happening fast, and there's so much money going into it, and not, and understanding the supply when things happen at this scale and this fast. There's not a lot of clarity, particularly when industries that haven't talked to each other are suddenly coming together, trying to work together. So that's part of this remarkable period that we're in right now. And I would say that, you know, natural gas, oil, we talk about energy security. I think rather than reliability, we really have to talk about energy security in terms of electricity as well, making sure that the electricity is there and that it's competitive and that it's affordable.
As you said at CERAWeek, you were on stage, both on stage and behind doors in your private conversations with the executives of these converging communities, power, tech, AI. What were some of your main takeaways or some of the light bulb moments that made you think that this we really are living in a different converging world?
Well, what struck me is the difference between a software engineer and somebody, I don't know, what we would say, an energy industry engineer. A software engineer, I don't know, might think a couple of months is the time frame. Somebody in energy, where you're building infrastructure, you may be thinking about a project that's going to take 7 years. And so I think there's just a gap of understanding there and how to work together. And then there are a lot of regulatory issues. Uh, and then there's local opposition that we're seeing to data centers. So I think it's a becoming, even as more money is being appropriated for it or committed, it's getting more complicated. And that's why I think really trying to get a handle on how these supply chains are actually working and where the bottlenecks will be, that's going to be kind of a mission for us over the next 6 months.
Yeah, that takes me perfectly to the next question I wanted to ask you, and that AI is it's very prevalent now and already very well baked into the trajectory of expectations of where this world is headed. But as you say, there are real choke points to building out an electrified and fully AI system. So what are those risks? Elaborate on those, please.
Well, well, I mean, there's the AI risks themselves, which we're seeing with new models and the power and the potential and the anxiety causing. And we see governments really struggling with the degree of regulation or not regulation of AI. I mean, I mean, obviously AI didn't just happen overnight, but it's now the rapidity with which it's moving. And of course, it's also being characterized as a race between China and the United States, which we hear so much about. And then it's a race among companies as well as to who will be the dominant providers.
Affordability and the economics of energy security, as we were talking about before, no longer is applicable to gas prices, but electricity prices. There is a very wide debate and a politicization going on around AI and data centers, especially in the US leading up to the midterm elections. How do you see the narratives that are transforming around AI and power? What what does the narrative have right or what's missing?
Well, I think a lot of, clearly we're seeing increases in electric power prices in many parts of the country. Um, what's not, but, you know, more of that is being attributed to the data centers at this point than it seems appropriate. There are a lot of other reasons that utilities have had to put in a lot of infrastructure. There was of course, all the requirements in terms of renewables and dealing with the intermittency of it. So there are a lot of factors that I think have driven up costs. And then there's just the inflation in the system that the cost of the inputs, the cost of transformers, the capacity to manufacture them increased. And then it's complicated because, you know, 5 or 6 years ago, people would have just very easily turned to China for low cost equipment. But that is going to get harder and harder to do given the overall, do we say competition, tension, whatever we want to say in the relationship uh, between China and the United States.
One key and very critical upstream component to AI and the chip economy are critical minerals. And you chaired a very authoritative study that was released earlier this year about copper in the age of AI. What are some of those key findings and conclusions about the conversions?
Copper, I mean, we start off that copper is the metal of electrification, and it's absolutely essential. But if we'd done that study 10 years ago, we would have just talked about, well, it's the lighting in the room, it's the machinery out there, it's the wiring in cars and other things. Uh, it's construction, and so. But now what's happened is where we had kind of one very big vector, and that's why copper was called Dr. Copper because the uh, its price and the demand for it seemed to reflect whether we're in an economic growth period or we were in a recession. But what we've said now, we now have five vectors of demand for copper, which is one is all the traditional called economic uses of copper. Second is energy transition, and that's what really got us interested in it, because if you take an electric car, it uses almost 3 times as much copper as a conventional car. Uh, Solar panels require copper in, and so you have energy transition demand. And by the way, uh, 1 out of 4 new cars sold in the world last year was an electric car. Uh, then, thirdly, you have data centers and AI, and we think that up to 20% of U.S. copper demand could be for data centers over the next couple of years. And then you have, on top of that, you have increased defense spending. Europe going from 1.5% to 5%. You have drones and the kind of electrification of the battlefield. And then you have something that a couple of years ago people would not have taken so seriously, but they're sure taking it seriously now: humanoid robots. And whether we're going to have 10 million, 100 million, or a billion by 2040, those critters are really wired. And so there's the demand there. And so we came to the conclusion that we're on a track now to have a big shortfall in terms of copper availability because of how long it takes to do a big new copper mine, 17 years. So there's a real problem that has to be solved there. or there will be a shortfall, or some things will not be achieved, or you can go down the list. But and part of it really requires, which is the same thing you see for gas pipelines, the same thing that you see for uh, wind. Wind, you see it. This problem of permitting, and it's a global problem. It's not just a U.S. problem or a Canadian issue or a European issue. It's a global issue.
The other side of the coin, the complementary theme that was driven at CERAWeek, in addition to convergence, was competition, and that was or a reference to a fracturing geopolitical order and a rules-based order. You talk to a lot of energy boards and CEOs, and yourself, you think on these issues. How do companies plan long-term capital and strategize in this era of regulatory risk and uncertainty?
It's harder. I mean, one book I did, which is not about energy at all, it's called Commanding Heights, the battle for the world economy, and it was about that shifting frontier between state and market, and about globalization, and how easily uh, things moved. Companies, I don't think. I remember one CEO said to me, we never thought about supply chains as a strategic issue until about 2019, 2020, and COVID amplified it. And now, of course, it's become very relevant with the tensions between the United States and China for both countries about supply chains. And so I think that's the kind of the one of the big. There are many challenges for people, CEOs and others who are running major global companies. But one of them is the kind of politicization of supply chains. Is that the playbook of globalization doesn't work so well when barriers of one kind or another are going up. It was not so long ago that people moved very easily from one country to another. Goods moved, services moved. I mean, look how much more difficult it is just for going from one country to another in terms of visas and things like that. So I think that's more challenging and people will kind of be, I think, nostalgic for those 3 decades of globalization, when you could just think about, well, what was the most efficient thing to do? You didn't have to worry so much about resilience, and it could be just in time, and now increasingly you hear it described as a just in case world, where you really need to build in resilience and duplication and rejigger your supply chains. And of course, that adds to cost, and that's why one reason people think we're going to kind of be in an era of higher inflation, because we won't have that very open world, which, there was a book that came out during that period called The Borderless World. Well, we're back in a world of borders.
And lastly, Dan, we're recording this again on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States of America. As one of the great storytellers of American energy, what are some of the key inflection points that you think about that have woven into the American story on energy that have made this country really an energy superpower?
Well, I think I mean, I do see a great flow. That during World War II, 6 out of every 7 barrels that the Allies used was produced in the United States. And then we went into a world in which the U.S. really went into decline, was on a course to import 60% of its oil. The question only seemed to be how much more would it be. I remember being at a National Petroleum Council meeting in 2003, where the discussion was that the U.S. was going to become the world's largest importer of LNG. And if anybody had said that it was going to become the largest exporter of LNG, they would have been excluded from the room. They would have been sent out of the room and put in detention. And yet here, that's happening. So I think that's quite remarkable to see how the U.S. has regained this position, and what it means for the U.S. economy, what it means for the world economy, what it means in terms of stability. And some of the studies we've done, including one we're just releasing now on LNG, shows, the job impacts of this have been quite considerable. So I think this is one of the, you know, really unknown or largely unsung or unrecognized stories about what the significance of the shale revolution has meant, not just for energy, not just for gasoline prices, but what it's meant for security and economic development and what it's meant for the position of the United States in the world. So, on the 250th anniversary of the U.S., to see that turnaround, and it was innovation that was driven by people who ignored what the textbook said because the textbook said you couldn't do this commercially. It turned out you could do it not only commercially, but you could do it at an enormous scale. So that's part of the American story.
Dan Yergin, thank you very much for your time and your reflections on the energy story that was, and looking forward to the risks, the challenges, the opportunities in a transforming, evolving energy system. Thank you, Dan.
Well, thank you, Naki. This was a great conversation as we look towards beyond the 250th anniversary.